Hey, what's up, guys? So, Invincible is a great show. So good that I couldn't even resist reading the comic just to see how it ends. Along the way, though, I noticed some huge changes. Some small details, like Monster Girl asking for cigarettes, but also some major differences in timelines and even character arcs, like Adam Eve dating William just to make Mark jealous, or how a lot of events that happens late in the show happens months before Omni-Man destroys the Guardians. So with Season 3 around the corner, let's break down every difference between the show and the comic from Seasons 1 and 2. Starting with Season 1. This video is actually a request for a friend of mine who'd prefer to stay hidden. If y'all have any ideas for a video, let me know down below. I would love to make them. Let's get to it. Let's start with episode 1 and issue number 1. The show starts with two security guards talking about family before the Mahler twins attack, aiming to kill the president. They're stopped by the ever-optimistic Guardians of the Globe and Omni-Man. You can tell already that they really don't like Omni-Man that much. In contrast, the comic opens up with Mark throwing a man with a bomb strapped to his chest in the air and letting him explode because the guy threatened to kill people and he just didn't have enough time to defuse the bomb, which was honestly a necessary response to the situation, but it's also a morally gray moment, already giving you a taste of what the Invincible comic is all about and showing the moral line he walks on, The story then jumps back 4 months. The rest follows the comic closely at first. Mark is introduced reading a comic on the toilet, but then his mom barges in. Honestly, these two have more boundary issues here than in the comics, really, because they're always just romancing in front of Mark. While Omni-Man fights the Mahler twins on TV, in the show, he battles a dragon in the comic. And when Mark talks about getting his powers one day, Omni-Man is noticeably more concerned about it here than in the comics where he just seems more indifferent. Mark's friend William is openly gay at the start of the show, unlike here when he comes out a lot later. He also stands up to a bully before and after gaining powers in the show. The first time he got pummeled, and the second time he won, whereas in the comic he only fights him after he gets his powers. When Mark's powers manifest, both mediums share the exact same dialogue. And they do the same thing, they're just chilling on the bed. The only difference is Omni-Man explains his origin on the roof in the flashback whenever he was a kid, while it happens indoors in the comic. But after this, that's when the timelines kind of change, stories diverge. Once he gets his powers, he lays on the bed and has a flashback of his dad's origin, and then they both go out on a joyride essentially. But while in the show he almost gets mowed down by the Mile High Club and then passes out midair, Mark actually meets the Mahler twins and the Teen Team during this time in the comic, forming connections with Adam Eve months before Omni-Man kills the Guardians. And all of this was completely cut from the show. Omni-Man is more hands-on with Mark's training, while here Mark teaches himself. To be honest, the comics speed through Mark's hero journey, making him almost like a prodigy, while the show portrays him as a relatable teen navigating responsibility. Both versions show Mark's first suit, and him facing the same criminals during his first patrol. But the show adds new dialogue between Mark and his mom coming to terms with his new life. Mark's hero name, Invincible, comes from his dad in the show, whereas in the comic it's from the principal after he fights that bully. They essentially say the same things, you're not invincible, but just different people. The show also introduces a villain connected to Adam Eve's backstory during Mark's first patrol, while the comic just sticks with random bank robbers the whole first issue. Now, the biggest difference though is the very end. When the Guardians of the Globe all get called up to the Watchtower or whatever it is to get demolished by Omni-Man? Yeah, that doesn't happen until issue 7, and it's so different. War Woman is chilling with a whole girlfriend here, and she keeps getting dragged to her home dimension by her mom and whoever she hires to take War Woman back. But she's like, no, I want to stay here with my girlfriend and protect Earth. While in the show, that just didn't happen. They're both successful businesswomen, but they're just introduced differently. But weirdly enough, her coworker looks an awful lot like her girlfriend in the comic. There's also some differences with looks as well, like her brown hair and really her whole complexion. Aquarius and Red Rush is the exact same for the most part. The Martian here and his relationship with this kid is completely new to the show, and same with Green Ghost, who's a man in the comic, while in the show she's a woman and she's also a photographer. Darkwing, who's Caucasian, in the comic, has more or less the same intro, but also has a really similar red sky, just like Batman the Animated Series, which I thought was pretty cool. But yeah, they all get there and they're confused, and then afterwards, people just started dying. They didn't even see Omni-Man coming in the comic. He was like a mustachioed ninja just twisting heads. The only person who saw him was Immortal when he said he never liked him, right before his head got cut off. Which is cool, but I'm actually really glad they changed this for the show, because in the show, as you know, they actually fought back. It was dead silence, just people fighting for their lives, and it was brutal and crazy, and I loved it. Honestly, I shouldn't, but it was a lot more interesting. I really like this change, but that shows that they couldn't beat one experienced Viltrumite. And if they struggled that much with him, that means they will be screwed for what's to come in the future. But now it's time to go a bit faster for the sake of time, you know what I mean? Episode 2. Now this one starts off vastly different from the comic, due to Omni-Man being hospitalized after killing the Guardians. But even then, it still adapts what takes place in issue number 3. The Flaxans, which are those green aliens who age rapidly, invade during this time, and Mark tries to stop them but accidentally harms civilians, and they all barely survive in the process. This is Mark's first real threat, and also his first meeting with Adam Eve and the Teen Team. In the comic, Mark already knows them by this point, and Omni-Man hasn't killed the Guardians yet, so he's very active during the invasion, pretty much taking down the Flaxans immediately. Then they retreat because of their aging issue, but return later. And they do the same in the comic, but in this, they actually kidnap Omni-Man, which, as you know, is not the case in the show. But yeah, they kidnap him in the comic, but they do it after he indirectly kills a student with a bomb strapped to his chest, and didn't even feel an ounce of sadness about it, which surprised Mark. It also led to another storyline when Mark is forced to do the same with his professor, which was that scene I was talking about earlier. But that whole storyline was completely cut from the show. Also, off-panel in the Flaxan planet, Omni-Man loses his powers, leads a rebellion, and regains them before returning to Earth. In the show, the Flaxans figured out their aging problem and came back 2 more times in this same episode. So in total, they've been on this planet 3 times before Mark and Omni-Man's fight and was never seen again except for a little cameo in the season 1 finale, which is different. They only popped up twice before the big fight. They pop up a lot afterwards, but it was only after their big fight. In the show, they come back and overwhelm the heroes on their 3rd invasion until a healed Omni-Man steps in, makes them retreat, and proceeds to destroy their entire civilization, declaring Earth as his to conquer. He returns after ensuring that they won't invade again. Both versions show Omni-Man's intense defense of Earth, but the comic portrays him as more restrained because he's around Mark, while the show reveals his darker intentions early on. Other differences include Damien Darkblood's debut. In the show, he's a very skilled detective, while in the comic, he's portrayed as not being that good, actually. Them all being in the hospital, the Teen Team learning about Omni-Man being his dad right now is new. How Mark meets Alan the alien has changed as well. It went from Omni-Man personally asking him for his help because he went out on a mission to Mark volunteering to go since Omni-Man was still recovering from the Guardians here. Amber also starts liking Mark after seeing him with Eve in the show and slips him a note in both mediums. Now we're at episode 3, and this starts with the funeral for the Guardians, which didn't happen in the comic until issue number 8. The funeral and the real burial went as planned in the show, nothing out of the ordinary, but in the comic, the Mahler twins attend the funeral to pay their respects, but it's revealed that they're also there to take the Immortal's head later in the issue. After the death of the Guardians, Omni-Man covered his tracks so much that Damien Darkblood was at a loss as to who the main culprit was. At first thinking it was Black Samson because the Guardians kicked him out after he lost his powers, but that ended up not being the case. Still, Samson's butler crashed the funeral, wanting revenge for Black Samson, but was pissed because the Guardians are dead, so there's no one to take revenge on. Then he quickly got dropped. In the show, after the funeral, Cecil decided to install surveillance cameras after Damien told Cecil he thinks Nolan did it, which didn't happen in the comic. Rex was caught cheating on Eve before the death of the Guardians in the comic here, whereas in the show, it happened around the time the funeral was happening. Eve went straight to Mark in the comic to talk about it in his room, which gave us this crazy panel. Whereas in the show, Mark chased after her after she storms off from the Guardian tryouts. But when Eve came back later that night, she saw him with Amber both times. The Guardians did the tryouts for the new Guardians of the Globe, and that's pretty much one-to-one with the comics. Outside of Shrinking Ray being a woman, and Rexplode having a darker complexion with red hair. And of course, a few dialogue changes here and there, like Monster Girl asking for a cigarette, but if I counted all of those changes, we'd be here all day, honestly. Then in the show, Amber and Mark chill in the room. Cecil interrupts them and asks them to stop Doc Seismic with Eve, and them to defeat him together. Whereas in the comic, Mark does it all on his own, and he takes all of the glory. Rex and Eve officially end things, which doesn't happen in the comics really, or at least not like this at all, because at least here, both of them got closure. And the Mahler twins break out of prison here. Another change since they were already free prior to the funeral and had the Immortals' head by then. But even though things are already ramping up in the comic, in the show, Mark's mom, Debbie, learns about Nolan potentially killing the Guardians pretty early on because of the demon, versus here when she pieced it together by thinking about how different he's being. But even then, it still takes her some time to figure it out. Episode 4 actually is very strange. It starts with a mummy returning, but then it instantly gets defeated by Invincible and Omni-Man. Afterwards, they both go to Mount Everest and back home. None of this happened in the comic, and the mummy in particular is new to the show. It gets stopped here, but then it gets brought back up in the finale of Season 2, which I'll talk about more in that video.
Wait, you're both female? Huh?
And?
But yeah, we might see more from this thing in Season 3. Everything Mark's mom does from here though is completely new. You know, her getting closer to the truth, talking to Olga about the secrets heroes keep from their loved ones, you know, all of that. Amber and Mark goes on their first date, and that's new because here they just don't go out that much. And if they do, they just don't show it. Omni-Man threatens Damien again, and they also start adopting stories from issues 18 and 31 into this episode. In the show, Mark volunteers to go to Mars in place of his dad in order to oversee some astronauts. In the comic, he had to go because this happened well after Mark's fight with Nolan, so they really don't have anyone else to send but Mark. No matter what though, everything that happens in Mars is completely one-to-one with the comic, outside of some uniform changes. Also, the Mahler twins finally start constructing the pods like in the comics, but not for Immortal, but for Robot. And Robot himself begins his plan of cloning Rex's body and putting his brain in there really early on, because that doesn't happen until well after Mark's fight with Nolan. You see, by this time, Immortal is about to come back to life in the comic and go after Omni-Man. So they put Robot's arc here to prolong that from happening until episode 7. So it's pretty interesting that they decided to do this now instead of later. Episode 5. This one takes a lot from issue number 19. It starts with Titan completely demolishing people for being on Machine Head's turf. We also learn more about his character and how he really does not like this line of work because of the empathy he feels towards others. So they honestly give him more characterization here. They do the same in the comic, but he only talks about how being a hero just isn't for him, and he needs to take down Machine Head because of the power and influence he has. While the show makes his morals more ambiguous, it makes Mark and the audience think he's actually a good guy doing what he has to for his family, when in the end we see that he actually was just using Mark.
Psych!
Amber and Mark are also having some issues because he's never around, just like their comic counterparts. Invincible is also making more of a name for himself around this time, and he does the same here. They then introduced Machine Head, and the way they do it is different. Here he's telling Titan how he's too valuable to let go of and is holding his family hostage in order to keep him working. While in the comic they introduce Machine Head scolding Titan for not earning as much as he used to and for being too chummy with Invincible. Mark being late to Amber's family dinner is new, and Titan's family is new as well because in the comic they just meet up and immediately just go against Machine Head. While here Titan shows Mark how the streets really are and also goes into more detail about the effects Machine Head has. Only after that and him asking his parents for advice is when he ultimately ends up helping. This version of Mark needed more convincing than the comic version because by that time he's just been handling everything on his own. Omni-Man's been out the picture for weeks now, most likely months. The Guardians of the Globe is slowly but surely falling apart with infighting within the team, which in the comic has but didn't really shed that much light on how bad the team was. Cecil just wanted to break them up instantly. But in the show they show more of a gradual breakdown of it and has specific reasons as to why they're so bad, like how uncoordinated they are, how they don't value human lives as much as they should, and because of their overall immaturity. More fights between Debbie and Nolan, and the amazing fight between Machine Head's goons, and these two are the exact same more or less. In the comic, at this point, he has a lot more experience with being a hero. He knows his strengths and weaknesses more than he does in the show, so he shows how unfazed he is whenever these other characters are attacking him. Everyone except for Battle Beast, who instantly just pummels him. But then they get saved by the Guardians of the Globe, and they actually have Immortal as a member here, which just shows how different the timeline is here compared to the show. While here, on top of being late to Amber's thing, Mark and Titan start off losing. They never even had a chance, but Mark didn't realize his true strength until he sees Titan getting beaten. But once that happens, Battle Beast does the same thing he does in the comics, but this time it's more drawn out.
Who's next?
Jesus Christ.
Then the Guardians come and he whoops the mess out of them. But in the show, this is how they learn what it takes to be protectors of the world. Here, they learn that they have to take this more seriously and step up. Omni-Man also watched the entire fight in order to teach Mark a lesson, because even though it was harsh, Nolan was technically right about Titan using Mark.
You'd be making a huge mistake.
What? Why?
Because he's using you.
Titan takes over just like in the comic, but has his family alongside him this time. And Cecil also collects a sample from Mark here in order to clone him, which is also different. I didn't see him do that in the comic. Episode 6. This one adapts a lot from issues number 6, 20, and 37. Showing a mystery man grabbing students and turning them into these things. Then we have the Guardians and Mark's recoveries, and the comics completely skip over this. But this show makes you feel everyone's sadness as they see their loved ones completely broken and battered. New drama between Amber and Mark about him not making it to the soup kitchen. And to make it up to her, he and Amber tag along with William and his date while touring a new college. In the comic, him and William checking this place out was already planned. Mark has no idea what he wants to do with his life here, while in the comic, going to this specific college was already planned at this point. Basically, he been made up his mind. They get there and Rick is gay and he's a jock. While here, he's not none of that. He's just your average dude who sleeps a lot. William's actually a jerk to him, but that's no surprise because he's a jerk to everyone in the comic, really.
Move this man!
The teacher is a lot more of a hardball here than in the show, and D.A. Sinclair showed up late and sat through the class, while in the show he showed up on time but caused a commotion and was asked to leave. Eve tells Mark she's going to stop being a normal hero and starts helping out around the world. And that goes the exact same way it does here. Except here, Eve is so into Mark, it's crazy. But in the show, you can't really tell that much. Just have to say that real quick though. Back to the college, the fight with the bloody cyborg goes the same as it does in the comics. Same with William finding out Mark is invincible. Amber also pretty much breaks up with Mark in both mediums. But they just go into more of the aftermath here. Because in issue 20, Mark doesn't go after Amber until 2 weeks later. But in the show, he does it only after a couple hours. William starts looking for Rick since Mark went after Amber, and that's when he gets caught by Sinclair. While here, they actually came up with a plan, and in this plan, William dressed up as a homeless man to lure out the robot. All in order to figure out who's behind all of this and take him down for good. Both mediums also show Amber with another guy, but for different reasons. Because Amber and Mark have been together for like a whole year now. Their problem is that Mark is just never there. While here, it's because she feels he ditched her and doesn't tell her the truth about himself. They do both emphasize how he has to choose between his girlfriend and being a hero though. After seeing William in trouble, he goes to save him, and this is pretty much 1-to-1 for the most part. William snaps Rick out of it and everything. He's just doing it as a friend here instead of a lover like in the show.
We had sex by the water! It was the best thing that ever happened to me!
Oh, that's a tad personal.
But the one thing that was left out was just how terrible Rick's time was with D.A. Sinclair. He's with Sinclair for like weeks, and it's just his slave, you know? Rick's crying every single time he has to carry out his orders. And it's really sad, honestly. The show has this too, but just not as much as it does in the comic. Also, Mark bringing Sinclair down this early is pretty wild. Mark doesn't bring Sinclair down until issue 37. And keep in mind, this is when Mark and Amber have been going out for sure more than a year now. It has to be. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But they're both well into their college semesters. Mark also works for the government at this time and is pretty much rich according to him. There's just so many changes here, but since the episode brings in so many different issues, it's hard to pinpoint the changes like that, you know what I mean? But anyways, back to the show. Nolan meeting up with his costume maker. I forgot what the job title was called, but yeah, that's new. And lastly, Debbie confronting Nolan about what he did to the Guardians is also new too. Episode 7 is largely its own creation. Everything is different, but it still adopts what happens from issues 10, 11, and 21 for the most part. Maybe even more, you know, y'all can let me know. But yeah, Debbie kicking Nolan out, her going to the government headquarters for protection, Mark and Amber's fight leading to him revealing his secret identity, and her reaction being, "I already knew, I just hate that you lied to me." All that is new. And now with this, right, I've seen a lot of videos on it back in the day. Is this an understandable response? Yes and no, because on one hand, no one deserves to be lied to in a relationship, and learning that your significant other doesn't trust you as much as you thought they did really sucks. You know, I understand her on that. But on the other end, this is a pretty big secret. You know, lives are on the line. Mark has no choice but to be secretive with it, because in no time, the wrong person will know who you are and will do something to your loved ones. I understand both sides, but either way it goes, it's still a change because once Mark told Amber in the comic, she was very excited, like a little too excited if you know what I mean. The Guardians having a party is new, and Black Samson getting his powers back this early is also new too. Robot gets his body before the big fight between Nolan and Mark, and of course everyone's like, ugh. This scene is the exact same as it was in the comic, except that they added more dialogue on what Nolan wants to say, which is pretty interesting. And Nolan looking for Mark throughout this episode is way more hectic here than it is in the comic, since no one knew Nolan did anything. Their life is pretty normal. Mark was just so busy that Nolan didn't have the time to have the big talk, and a bunch of circumstances just happened to where it ended up being after he killed Immortal. Versus here when he's looking for Mark everywhere, but at this time everyone has practically turned against Nolan because they know what he did. My boy right here is dying. I forgot his name sadly, but this is new. Nolan asking William where Mark is, Mark and Eve's fight after Amber dumped him, and all of Cecil's attempts to stop Omni-Man is new too. So Cecil facing him and asking questions, him getting Sinclair's robots to fight Omni-Man, and him bringing back that huge monster. This thing does show up in the same issue as Immortal coming back, but it wasn't from Cecil, it was just a random monster that popped up in an amusement park. But in this show, they put it on ice in an earlier episode to bring it out whenever he needed it. And lastly, Immortal coming back is the exact same, except for them showing his backstory throughout the years, which was honestly a really nice change. Okay, and now we're on episode 8. The fight is really similar to the comics. The comic does go a little more in depth with Nolan's audition process, but other than that, they took a lot from issues 11 and 12. And then some, really. They upped Nolan's ruthlessness so much because they wanted to emphasize how much Nolan believes in his cause. Some call Nolan brainwashed, and others just call him a bad person. Either way it goes, his upbringing is the reason as to why he's doing all this, because the Viltrumite way is all he knows. But what this show does is really humanize Nolan. They added a flashback of Mark when he was a kid to show how much this hurts him, and he displays so much more emotion, more sadness and doubt. But we'll talk more about Omni-Man in Season 2. In the comic, they also fought underwater and in the Arctic. The Guardians watching this fight unfold in real time and all of them training afterwards while he's recovering is new. Eve and William accidentally meet up at Mark's house to see how he's doing. But in the comic, Eve comes back to William's house to inform him about Mark's condition, and to celebrate the good news, they both go out to eat. This is also when they started dating here as well, but they don't do that in the show. Mark gets introduced to the White Room and is asked to replace Omni-Man essentially, but Mark says no, I need some time to think here, you know? But in the comic, he instantly accepts the offer once he learns that he'll get his school and really everything he and his mom needs paid for. After this, they become very wealthy, which is how he was wealthy earlier, whenever that robot cyborg thing was going crazy on campus in the comics. One change the show makes that I love is that they actually shine some light on these characters. You know what I mean? Like the sadness they feel after learning your father, your significant other lied to you for 20 years, saying they loved you to your face but calling you a pet behind your back, and then beating up your son, or having your father murder a bunch of people, call your mom out her name, and just leaves. The show gets as close as it can be to real people figuring out all of these things for the first time. And that's a great change from the comic, because there it's so fast that you don't appreciate it as much as you do here. And at the very end, with Mark talking to Alan the alien, is 1-to-1. Guys, without being a keyboard warrior, please let me know if I missed anything, because there was no way I got every single difference. But I did try my best, you know, so. Are y'all excited about season 3 coming out? Do y'all have any changes that were really good or really bad, in your opinion? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll be doing season 2 as soon as I can. I'll catch y'all in the next one. Peace out.